I'd like to actually get starting quite soon because we have a wonderful and very exciting rest of the afternoon. So as we're here to listen and as we're here to also challenge a little bit the ideas that we have about Europe and how the rest of the world sees Europe and maybe what Europe's role is in the world, I would like, without further ado, to introduce the moderator for the second panel of today's conference that will be looking at democracy, security, and migration. So a very warm welcome to Aart de Geus, who's a former minister of the Dutch government and former Deputy Secretary General of the OECD and a member of the Conclave board. Aart, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Erika, and I see some people are coming in, but we will resume, we will start this second panel. And in this second panel, I may invite two ladies. The first one is Rukia BAKARI. She's a political scientist working in the Gorée Institute in Senegal, originally from Kenya. Big hand for Rukia BAKARI. And the second lady is Trisha SHETTY. She is from India. She's a lawyer by formation, and she works also as the president of the advisory board of the Paris Peace Forum. Trisha SHETTY.
Okay. Rukia, let me start to introduce you a little bit more by asking you, tell us what is happening in your part of the world. And also we heard in this former panel, we heard people speak about military power, about trade power, about geopolitics. But what is going on the ground in your part of the world?
Good evening, everybody. Aart, thank you for the opportunity to be on this stage. And all protocols observed. I'm here not purporting to represent Africa, because Africa is not homogeneous, but I bring my experiences, having lived in Africa, working in Africa, and having worked in the East and now working in the Western part of Africa. So my views will not be representing the continent, but will be the general views as a community worker, as somebody who's working with the citizens. So I may not have all my statistics on what the politicians are saying or what the economics are, but I'll be giving you my experiences like as they are, as I work with women and young people in Senegal and in the Sahel region. Where we are at now in the Sahel, the political situation is not very easy because we have seen a number of unconstitutional changes of government consequently in 4 countries, and this has had impacts on the social and economic work that, for example, as an NGO, we're working with women and young people's groups, but then because of the coup d'etat, the unconstitutional changes of government, some of the development money that came in was stopped. So when this happened, it means it is you don't hurt the government that is in place. You hurt the citizens. You hurt the people who receive this aid, because as it is very it's known that giving the government is not able to meet all its needs for the citizens. Sometimes the government is very far from the citizens, so it is actually civil society that does the work of government with communities. Therefore, when the money is stopped because of political reasons because of that, then the consequences are huge, and it actually ends up hurting, the work that is being done for the citizens. So this already gives a very negative perception about some of the policies that are, or some of the decisions that are, that are taken because of politics that happen.
We will come back to that point, because you touch upon the trust or distrust that there is in politics and in institutions maybe, and maybe cooperation with Europe is even further away. But it's very good that we realize that for ordinary citizens in your part of the world, there is a day-to-day struggle for life. Thank you. Trisha, you are from India, and when we prepared this meeting, you told me that from Europe, India is seen as a democracy, but that we should put some question marks. Before we come to that, I want to take the opportunity to ask you, as the president of the advisory board of the Paris Peace Forum, which was 2 weeks ago, I think, concluding Peace Forum in a world of war.
Thank you for having me here. So yes, I think Justin Weiss, who's the founder of the Paris Peace Forum, when he and everyone decided to name it the Paris Peace Forum, they really did shoot themselves in the foot a little bit. It was challenging to host the forum this year, but again, we also had to deal with Russia's aggression against Ukraine that happened. And also, yes, what happened in Gaza took up a lot of space, but also what's happening in Sudan. So there was a lot of complexities in general. We didn't see the kind of participation you would usually see as with regards to heads of states, rightfully so. But here's what were the constructive outcomes of the forum that I took to heart. One is that President Macron did call for ceasefire and asked that United States of America, the UK do follow suit. He said that, this is, at this point, this is absolutely unacceptable, the killing of children and women. I should note that the Paris Peace Forum is a continuation of a story. So we had Jacinda Ardern come there and renew the Christ Call Church for Peace forum that the announcement that they made in terms of protection of conversations that happens within the online space. We had Maria Ressa, who's an old-time alumni of the forum, present there, again call for the fight against disinformation on the internet, which we will talk about. We also have Philippe Etienne here, who will attest to how the forum came to be, which is a lot of the initial people who came together, they put a lot of thought and intentionality into what they want the forum to be. And in the 6th year of its evolution, I think we're seeing that it's an ever-evolving entity, but it's good in the fact that it's still malleable. That means it's more responsive when it comes to change. Did the forum achieve peace? No, but that's not the mandate of the forum. The mandate of the forum is focusing on very specific issues: governance of space, governance of AI. What does, vaccine equity look like within the global north and global south? You spoke about how you don't like the word global south and global north. As someone from the global south, I don't either. But the forum, given its geolocation in Paris, is doing a lot to bring voices from the south to center their grievances, if you may.
Thank you for sharing these impressions, and I can feel that you are very much inspired, so you will continue for a few years, I hope, as a president of the advisory board.
We see, my hope is to never be attached. I've seen when you observe people in positions of power and influence, it becomes tricky when they start liking how the chair feels under their derriere. So my hope is to not be attached to any place that I'm in. Okay. Hopefully there'll be other people that will do a better job.
Thank you, Trisha. By the way, we agreed beforehand that we would call each other by first names, as not to complicate and follow suit with Philippe. So, Trisha, when it comes to India, I already said that you told me that India should not be perceived as a perfect democracy, and maybe the crisis in democracy, on which I also will ask Rukia later on. How should we see India?
Thank you for that question. Let me just set a bit of context, right? Right now at the EU, I was looking up a lot of what is the foundational principles of the EU, and it struck me the commitment for freedom, peace, equality, rule of law, promoting sustainability, democracy. That's what the EU was built upon. So before I get to the crisis in democracy in the world's largest democracy, let me just address something that I heard in the previous panel where a lot of conversation about strategic autonomy was raised. You know, I find it specifically rich that EU and the USA will look at us and talk to us about strategic autonomy. But what they truly mean is we will respect your autonomy provided you do exactly what we want you to do, provided you vote exactly how you want us to vote. And as someone who comes from a country where we had to fight for our sovereignty, conversations about autonomy, sovereignty are not just words in books, you know. We know the price of what it means to fight for sovereignty. So when you talk about this, you know, India did not condemn or sanction Russia. And we still stand by that from a country perspective, because Russia is our largest defense provider. We also managed to get a good deal when it came to Russian oil. So I think the conversation for us becomes very tricky when these conversations about sovereignty are dictated to us from, you know, and when I say us, I'm talking about South Africa, I'm talking about Brazil, I'm talking about India. We took similar positions. So when I'm going to go back to protecting democracy, I want to first highlight that it means recognizing everyone's sovereignty and their autonomy. That also in regards to, you know, President Biden, who said India's stand is somewhat shaky when it comes to the Ukraine stand. He managed to say India's stand is somewhat shaky when it comes to Ukraine stand, but by the same extension, the red carpet was rolled out for our Prime Minister when they hosted him as the marriage of super democracies, India and France, coming together. Now, I need to give you some context. Our Prime Minister did not have the right to enter the United States of America. He did not get the right to have a diplomatic visa in 2005. More than that, his tourist visa was revoked because under the Immigration Act of America, they do not allow visas for anyone who has credible allegations of terrorist activities or carrying out violent activities against minority communities, right? And this is where we stand right now as a country. I'm particularly struck, I know this is a longer conversation, we'll get back to it, but I want to go back to the word freedom. When superpowers right now are recognizing India, I think we must ask freedom for whom? Because we saw this when Russia and Ukraine happened. Suddenly, it became a problem for everyone, because I think the EU intrinsically understood freedom and protecting democracy means protecting democracy everywhere. But I still don't think the lens has expanded to also include protecting democracy in the global south. It's still looked at very much within the global north, economic north perspective. Right? And why do I say this? Because if you talk about the World Freedom Index that Reporters Sans Frontières published, India currently ranks 161st out of 180 countries. Top 10, 8 out of the top 10 are EU countries. Norway is the first, which belongs to the European continent, and the 10th is Timor-Leste. So I take particular solace in being here, recognizing that the EU isn't just a talk shop. You all have proved it by the virtue of protecting freedom of speech and by extension protecting democracy. And by that, there should be a deep recognition that your democracy and your freedom does not just have borders within these walls. It must translate to how you do business with the world's largest democracy. Because if you don't account for this, remember the words of Maria Ressa, who back in 2016, the Nobel laureate, said Philippine democracy will die because she raised alarms about interference in Facebook, how media was not being controlled and the spread of disinformation, which we're now hearing the EU talk about when it comes to Eastern European troll farms. Look at what happened in India. Look at what happened in the Philippines. We would have told you this years ago before you all had to start holding emergency, European Union meetings. So that's what I will, I'll give the floor now, but that's what I would like to set the context at.
Thank you very much. Maybe, Rukia, we can also talk about how you see democracy and how do you see the role that Europe plays when it comes to democracy in your part of the world?
I think in my part of the world, we are redefining democracy. You know, as Africa, we have our own contexts, our own realities, and the idea of democracy as it is prescribed by, excuse me to use the word, the West, is not applicable in Africa. And this does not mean that the African citizens do not want democracy, because, you know, Afrobarometer polls suggest that 63% of Africans believe in democracy. But the question is, what type of democracy are we talking about? Is it elections? Is it, who sets the standards for democracy? Who calls a country democratic and undemocratic? I think the idea that, for example, EU as an institution has members. You know, it has member states, and each of these member states have their own policies, their own agendas. You know, so it has come to a point now that that the whole idea of democracy is being rethought, because Africa has always been on the receiving end, unfortunately, you know, and this is changing now, because, you know, before, you know, we were just depending on aid, and that has, but things have changed. The Africa of 1960 is not the Africa of 2030. Now Africa has advanced. There's institutional capacity, there's strong economies, and all these things are, there's young people who not all want to go to Europe. There are those who want to stay and want to make things work. So now we have to step back, you know, as for example, international partners, EU as an institution, you know, and see and listen. I really liked what the panelists here said. We need to listen. We need to have humility. We need to think about what we say. And just because, for example, the EU is giving money to African countries, that doesn't mean that they can dictate or they can set the terms of what is to be done. I think now most African countries have said, you know, thank you, Trisha, sovereignty, it might be just a word, but Africans, they're poor, but they're proud. Pride is something that is important for them. And the fact that we have gone post-colonial, we're no longer, you know, we know there was a colonial history, we acknowledge it, but then we have to move on. Okay, it happened. You know?
Do you think that the European Union as a political project, so as a union, is paying enough respect to African countries?
I think it's not, because the way the EU is perceived is, you know, I really wrote, I just want to read this because like a week ago we had a meeting in Dakar and the EU representatives, and one of the community members said that how do they perceive the EU as, if I may call it, post-colonial and unbalanced? It's perceived as old-fashioned and paternalistic, underdeveloped and unequal. Ouch, I'm sorry, but these are perceptions, and perceptions of citizens are important because they are the ones who can enable, for example, countries to implement policies. So I think the approach and the attitude has to change. It's no longer like, you know, if there's going to be a partnership, it has to be a partnership of equality. Yes, just because, as they say, you give somebody money does not mean that you can tell them, you know, off tell them off like they're a child. They say no, you know, things are not going to work this way. So I think the change in attitude is important. Respect is important. It's how you say something that matters. You know, sometimes you can, you know, and also I think one issue that is very, I feel the perception is that the EU sometimes does not act neutrally. It takes sides.
Well, I think it's interesting that what you say echoes the comments by Pedro, because Pedro learned us, or taught us, I have to say, that we as Europeans, should also listen to how we say things to others.
Yes.
That was the mind trick that you taught us. And you are saying the same, listen to yourself, how you are speaking to others. Is that also the perception in India?
The truth is, right now, we don't have the right to speak anymore in India. That's the truth. So there's a reason I gave context beforehand about respecting our sovereignty, respecting autonomy when it comes to how you do business with India, right? But I'll go back to the same trip. Our Prime Minister, till date, he's coming towards the end of his second term. He's going to be up for re-election. By all measures and standards, he will win. Till date, he's not taken a single press conference. Not a single press conference. The first time he did was when he went to the United States of America. It was the first time they could not really, take that part of the meeting of super democracies out of the door, where you don't have a White House press conference. And it was the first question that was asked to him by a White House press correspondent, where she raised the question of minorities and whether their rights are being protected or not. What ensued was the most vitriolic attacks that the journalist was subject to the point where the National Security Council, I think John Kirby his name is, he put out a statement saying, this is unacceptable, you must stop. What was also interesting is President Obama was questioned about Modi's participation as, again, the meeting of super democracies, world's oldest democracy with the world's largest democracy. And President Obama said that he would advise President Biden to bring up the issues of minority protection. That the Indian fabric will fall apart if the question of ethnic minorities, the violence that they're being subject to, is not addressed. What ensued was our Chief Minister of Assam putting out a tweet that says, I quote, there are many Hussein Obamas in India itself. We should prioritize taking care of them before considering going to Washington, D.C. The Assam police will act according to our priorities. A sitting Chief Minister is threatening POTUS for bringing up the issue of ethnic minorities. So the question is, we don't have the right to speak in my country anymore. We don't. And that's where Europe must question, if you are doing business with India, which you are, because you want to protect democracy, and then I think a lot of the questions about China came up, right? Why is India looked at as a significant player? Because China, Russia, techno-autocratic superpowers, you need an opposition. And you keep saying the opposition is because India is a democratic superpower. No, the truth is, you look at India as access to the world's largest population of people with the world's largest base of cell phones. You look at us as access users without recognizing we are citizens who deserve rights. And if you don't protect citizens with rights, you protect nothing. Right now, we're still looked at just users. That's it. So, yeah.
Well, this is a very strong message, not only to the European Union, but also to the United States and others.
More so to the United States of America, more so, because this sense of authoritarian position of leadership. I'll tell you why more so to the United States of America. When Trump got elected, he became everyone's problem. It's no more national sovereignty. Everyone's problem. EU consolidated, Angela Merkel, rightfully, everyone said Europe needs its own power base. We cannot rely on America anymore. Our speaker here, the ambassador, kept very subtly raising the alarm for if Trump gets re-elected, watch out. India has elections in the same year as 2024. Somehow that doesn't get brought up, even though we know the probability of our Prime Minister winning is much higher than the risk of Trump getting re-elected after having lost. Yet, our conversation, our election, our democracy is never looked at as a global focal point.
Thank you for also sharing with us these I would say, really political dilemmas where we should reflect upon. Maybe, Rukia, you can also share with us, are these feelings also relevant for the grassroots movements that you work with, or are they dealing with other problems? And more, maybe I ask you, how do you see the role of Europe? Also, we can go to how would you like to see the role of Europe towards I would say, the African people?
I think there is a role of Europe. The partnership is much needed because we live in a global world. We need each other, and Europe and Africa as continents are neighbors. and then any problems that occur in Africa affect Europe directly. For example, the migration issue. So first, in my humble opinion, I think Europe should walk the talk, that they should genuinely implement, these strategies. I mean, I made a list of all these wonderful strategies that the EU has, It has policies, G7 strategy, G20 strategy, global gateway, joint EU vision, migration strategy, peace and security strategy. These strategies don't mean anything if they do not have an impact on the ground. And common citizens do not know what these strategies are. Because the idea about international cooperation is impact on the citizens, impact on life, impact on the quality of life, on the economies. So, ideally I would say that we should start by genuinely really putting all the strategies in one basket and saying, okay, what is the solution? We've been talking, conference after conference, but there has to be an impact, and we have to address common challenges. As the African continent, we have common challenges of migration, we have common challenges of going beyond donor, recipient, this relationship has to change because, but it cannot change unless policies, unless, for example, the European Union helps African countries to be able to be part of groups like the G20, because it's a continent of 54 countries. But even the representation at that level is, we're still treated like it's one country. They talk about Africa. So,
can you maybe give some examples of how the European Union executes projects that help? Because in the very beginning, you also said that sometimes African governments stand in between. But on the other hand, we also know that through NGOs, a lot can be done. Yes. So maybe one example where you say, well, that example could be followed in other cases?
Yes, absolutely. Because, for example, the European Union money that comes through Africa is through multilateral, agreements. But maybe it's time for them to choose a bilateral path with individual countries, because when you cluster, the Sahel, what is happening in Chad is not happening in Mauritania, is not happening in Mali. The contexts are different in as much as they share the same geographical, area. So the most important thing is maybe a change of strategy would be, in as much as because of the bureaucratic processes of giving money to organizations, for transparency and for accountability, is try investing money at the bottoms up from the grassroots. It might not be a large amount of money, for example, and then what are the needs of those communities? Because maybe at the European Union level, their idea is about, strengthening capacity. But then maybe what area of capacity? Education? Okay, education, so how do we do that? Give the government money, but the government has a lot of ghost projects that they have using aid money, but at the end of the day, there's nothing really to show for it. But then civil society organizations are working with communities. They know exactly, what our problem is? We just need to fix this center with sewing machines, and then these girls will have vocational skills, and from there, we can move on. We don't need a big project. So sometimes the projects that need help are very small but very impactful. Maybe we have to not just think big all the time. Maybe we need to just think maybe having that small project having a big impact rather than thinking of a big project that might be very bureaucratic, to fulfill.
So is this, according to the formula, think global, act local?
Yes, think global, act local, because this is it, like you ask them what are their needs, and from there, this is what we do when we have projects. We don't go anymore, like before development work was like, you have this idea, they need a bridge, but they tell you, no, we need to fetch water at the well, because that's the only place where we get to meet and interact and talk.
Okay,
so
thank you.
The needs have to also be taken into consideration in the context.
I want to go to the audience, but before that, so be prepared that I will ask you for questions.
Yeah.
I want to build a bridge between the three themes of our panel. We have been talking about democracy. In the preparations, Rukia, you also spoke about insecurity. And, well, where democracy is not lived, is not valid, there is a lot of insecurity. When there is insecurity, there can be a reason for migration, and insecurity can also be insecurity about food or climate or whatsoever. So what should be the attitude of the European Union regarding migration? I give you 2 minutes to think about it, because I first asked Trisha to respond to this question.
You know, we must understand that these words have real-life consequences on the lives of people, right? Pegasus. You would be aware of Pegasus, right? So it begets me to mention that one of the potential targets of Pegasus was Charles Michel, as well as President Emmanuel Macron. That's the sort of scope and scale that it was, the NSO spyware. The Indian Military Defense Agency spied on over 1,000 people, human rights defenders, journalists, judiciary members, and one of the people that they spied upon was a survivor of sexual abuse who alleged that the judiciary, one of the chief justices, was harassing her, and then they spied upon her phone too. So the problem with migration is, you need stability and security. And that's why I keep going back to, you must protect institutional frameworks, because without that, you will have havoc and chaos on the streets. Now, coming back to the wider scope of migration, look, visas are just not given to brown, black people, right? I take particular offense at having to apply for a UK visa, where I'm made to pay £200, and then if you send them an email, for each email that they respond to, you have to pay another £5. If you call them, they charge you per minute. You first pay your debit card, and then they charge you per minute. Yeah, we were the country they colonized for the longest, yet all other countries, with your passports, you can just walk in. Right? Migration affects people of color on an intrinsic level in the way that it affects our day-to-day activities. The fact that you couldn't just call up an Indian speaker, if I did not have my visa to be in Europe, I wouldn't just be able to get up because you called me a week ago and take my plane and show up here. No. The fact that we get date-to-date visas, date-to-date single entry, date-to-date visas. Oh la la. And then you hear EU and Europeans and Britishers complain about it is very difficult to apply online and get a visa to go to India. I'm pretty sure it's not date to date.
Thank you, Trisha.
So, migration affects, just to underscore, it inherently affects people of color, and you need to address violence, because right now the largest people who are stateless are Rohingyas, who are in Myanmar right now, and they're actually suing Facebook for some billion amounts because of Facebook's relationship in spreading violence and not protecting the Rohingya people. So again, when you talk about migration, please account for what is causing migration, right? In the EU, in America, you'll tend to be very reactionary. After the fact, there are papers and reports drawn up about how to solve the next one. Again, look to the global south, and you will understand, if you call for peace there, it could probably solve a lot of the crisis that we're all forced to deal with.
I saw that your comments inspired Rukia.
It did inspire me, because somebody coming from the African continent, you cannot just travel to Europe. You need a 3-month notice appointment before your travel. To get an appointment, then you need another month to get the visa approval, so you need 4 months. So fortunately for me, I already did my 3 months because I was in Brussels last month. So I had a visa that's just going to be valid until next month. So yes, visa policy is something that if it is made a bit easier, it will really curb migration. I don't think people just want to go to another country because they want to go to another country. I think we have to have really, for Africa, we have to have fairer trade policies. This is because agriculture is the backbone of Africa. We have a lot of women and young people. Women are the ones who are into agriculture and young people. So if we don't have policies, EU can help, for example, in pushing for fairer trade policies, so that what we, as an extracting continent, we extract minerals, we have agriculture, we have tea, coffee, cocoa, but it all goes out, and then we buy it back, you know, at a cost that means that we have to have fair trading policies. It's the only way that we can compete, because otherwise, with the debt, with a lot of borrowing by the African countries, and it burdens with tax on the citizens, and then people can't make it. So yes, I mean, you know, in Senegal, it is really a national catastrophe, because every day, young people are going into the boats. They say, you know what, we have two options. We go to, they say in Wolof, if I translated that, we either reach Barcelona or we reach Barca, which is when you die, you know, between when you're dead, and they say, you know, the time between those who believe in religion, that when you die and then there's going to be a judgment day. So there's that waiting period. They say, you know what, it's either that or that. I'll just go. There's 12, 15, 18. There's a problem. And it has, and who is addressing the migration issue in the EU? I'd really like an honest answer on that. Because if we don't address that, then we're just talking. We have to address those root problems, and the economy. You know, make economies better, allow trade to be fair, and then young people will stay, they won't leave.
Well, I am very sorry to say that in my own country, in the Netherlands, but also in some other countries, you see a sentiment that migration is something that should be controlled or restricted or whatsoever. What I hear you say is not so much about asylum, which is very specific, but in general that migration is something that should be something like a fair play, where fair rules are there, and this would help a lot for good relations between the European Union and your countries and other parts of the world. Once again, the sentiment in some European countries is not very favorable. On the other hand, I agree with you, and this is also what I learned from Guterres, that migration is something that should be managed in a it's not bad to manage migration. It should not be a jungle, but if it is managed, it should be managed in a fair way. I think this is, for this part of the conversation on migration, a good conclusion. I now turn to the audience and I look at you who would have a question or a comment. And we have some 15 minutes left, so we start with Daniela Schwarzer.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Daniela Schwarzer, work with the Bertelsmann Foundation, and I'm a proud board member of the Conclave. I have a question to both panelists. First of all, thank you for a very lively and really fascinating discussion. To Trisha, my first question really is, you kind of invited Europe to be more forward-leaning on democracy, vis-a-vis India, but I guess also vis-a-vis other countries. What would you recommend we should do very practically? Because there's more and more caution. We see that very clearly in the EU's foreign policy. And to Rukia BAKARI, my question is, you said you are in a way reinventing or rethinking democracy in your country, and you pushed back on the classical, I think, Western standards, if I got you right. But I would like to know what the common base then is. If you speak of democracy, would it be what we find in the UN founding documents, or would you even say those principles, which I would say is very much also in the Western understanding of democracy, are not what you are thinking of? So I would be very interested to hear more on how you rethink democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Trisha.
Thank you, Daniela. We need the EU, America, to stop sanitizing the image of our current Prime Minister. There is no other way for me to put it. The Gujarat riots that I referenced to, because of which he did not have the right to enter America, BBC put out a documentary recently, Modi, the India Question, where there was also a citation by the UK department that said Narendra Modi is directly responsible, right? Guess what happened? The BBC documentary was banned. All links to the BBC documentary on Twitter were barred. And when Elon Musk was questioned, the flag bearer of free speech, who has no problems challenging America and the EU on how information must be free on Twitter, X, if you may, he said, no, but I need to follow the country laws. And he said, rules for some, rules for not all. That's the problem. This is the current state of the Indian democracy. Do business with India because it makes practical sense. But when you say India is a rising GDP, please acknowledge that our current billionaire, Adani, has had the biggest jump in his economy more than any other billionaire in the world. Please acknowledge that the top 1% controls 70% of India's economy. To benefit whom? Please acknowledge that our current unemployment rate is at 10.6%, where global publications will cite, the Indian government says the unemployment is 3.6%, but that is not a credible source. So, please acknowledge that we need you to do business with India. We need you to continue strategic ties. Here I must say, I think France has played a very critical role because France has done exemplary things when it comes to providing visas for Indian students, right? Giving that in a very democratic, fair play. Also recognizing India has a very strong role to play when it comes to defense, when it comes to trade, when it comes to culture. They've done it in a really good way. The only thing we ask is stop sanitizing the image of our world leader on international platforms, because that is having a direct impact on the lives of people on ground. I cannot tell you, just to quickly sum this up, Gujarat riots, again I go back to, there was a case of Bilkis Bano. This woman, this young woman, 21-year-old, who was gang raped, who had a child whose child was killed, 3-year-old child was killed with her head being banged into the ground. I'm sorry, these details are going to be gruesome, but I need you to bear witness to this truth for a minute. Her family was gang raped. She saw her mother gang raped, her sister gang raped. Multiple members of her family were killed. The 11 people who were convicted, right? Same Gujarat riots where the British government said Modi is directly responsible. America denied him visa. 2 years ago, during our independence, all the 11 convicted criminals were set free on grounds of good behavior. This is the message that we are receiving right now on ground, where we are told, shut up, toe the party lines, you do not have the right to speak, to dissent. All we ask is do business with India, because it makes perfect sense. You're recognizing us as a superpower, thank you. Also, India will tell you we don't want you to recognize us as a superpower in challenge to China. This is critical. India wants you to do business with them, not because we are opposition to China, but because you recognize the trade power and the strategic power of India. But do not sanitize the image of our world leader, embrace him, call him this superpower hero who's like, do not fill into the fallacy of him being a god man. That's dangerous. We are going to become autocratic. If we haven't already.
I don't think anybody could say it more clear than you did, so thank you very much. And Daniela has her response on the first question. Can you meet the level of clarity of Trisha in the response to Daniela's question?
Level of rage. Level of clarity, I don't know, but Daniela, of course, I mean, democracy, the foundation of democracy is what? Rule of law, human rights, respect of human rights and freedoms. Those absolutely are the fundamental. What I mean is maybe the yardstick of democracy is not the same. For example, elections are not working for Africa. And the EU sends election observations and they say, the case of Niger, they had elections I think less than a year and a half, and then there was a coup d'etat. And it was the EU endorsed and said it was fair. So maybe we need to rethink democracy in terms of how are we measuring democracy, you see? And maybe the context of the country. It can come in the form of elections, but maybe not, I don't know. I really don't have an answer, but all I'm saying is that maybe we should not just have one yardstick to measure democracy, because 500 years of democracy of America and 60 years of democracy of an average African country is not the same. You know, we still have a long way to go, but we have to acknowledge the good things. We have to acknowledge the efforts that are going to making, you know, to encouraging democratic societies. I think we have to acknowledge, not just, you know, look at the fact that, you know, there's no solution with the coup d'etats. No, there's still hope, I think. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you very much, and I think you meet the level of clarity, although I see a difference in the sense that Trisha is bringing her response to a very, very pointed message, where you took the other route. You bring in the need for the eye for nuance on democracy when we are, as a European, when the European Union is interacting with African countries and African societies, we have to have an eye for the nuance in democracy. There is room for maybe 2 other questions. So I look in the room. So who would like to take the floor? This is Stéphane Collignon. And is there one other? Because then I would like to take that other question as well. So be prepared. Stéphane.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating discussion, and I've done my provocative entertainment before. But here, I have some thoughts, and I wonder what our 2 speakers would, or 3, in fact, would say about that. Rukia said that respect national sovereignty, which I think indeed is one of the foundations of democracy. It means citizens, usually in a democracy, can choose their government and the policies and laws that are applied to themselves. Of course, we have about 2/3 of mankind living in regimes where there is no democracy, and maybe even more than that, I mean, number of countries. But if we respect autonomy, it means also we respect the fact that there's different senses of how power should be exercised, that people in some cultures accept to surrender to superior and to hierarchy. We should think about how that can be changed. That's a different discussion. But I wonder whether the implication of that is not that if we say we respect sovereignty, and I want to put in bracket that the whole thing of European integration is to overcome national sovereignty for ourselves within the Union. But with the rest of the world, if we respect sovereignty, it would mean also that we respect dictatorships in some countries. Now, personally, I think this is probably inevitable. But what is absolutely unacceptable is that one country invades another one and kills people there. This is why I say with the BRICS countries and the alignment, whether it's Brazil or South Africa or others, is totally unacceptable, because this is the violation of the very principle of national sovereignty.
So your question is, should we also respect the sovereignty in aggression?
Not aggression, but we must probably accept that in some countries democracy works differently, but we must not accept aggression between countries.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. There is also a question of Maria and of Guillaume. I will take the 3 in one, so that in your responses that we can have a final round of response. First Maria and then Guillaume.
Okay, Maria again, Conclave board member. The theme of this panel is democracy, insecurity, and migration. But I'd like to bring a new word, which is development. And this is because I want to ask one question. I really believe if your countries have fairer chances to develop themselves, then it will be easier to deal with insecurity, migration, and to bring about the democracy you need. So, how do you feel about this? Do you feel that in the current order, your countries have real chances to develop themselves? Or there is something to be corrected?
Thank you. Guillaume?
So I have a question about sovereignty. What is the meaning of sovereignty at a time of climate change and digital platform? Because we see that the digital platform have a huge impact on your economy, on the way people behave, and it's very rapid. And at the same time, climate change is completely changing the game. We are completely interconnected. And sometimes, speaking about sovereignty, prevent ourselves to solve the real problem. And we have new, urgent, major problem. How can we discuss and solve that?
Thank you very much. And there is one last question by Jochen Sandik. And he promised me to be very, very short.
Super short. We could hear voices of anger also, very strong energy. My question is very simple. It's all about empowerment. That's what we feel. Can you tell us an insight of your countries about empowerment in relationship from bottom up and top down?
Okay.
Because, yeah, that's my question.
We have 4 questions. There is one on sovereignty by Stéphane Collignon. There is one on development by Maria. There is one on the relation between climate and migration by Guillaume. And there is a question on empowerment by Jochen. You may choose. You may answer all, but be brief. But you can also say, well, I prefer to comment just on that or that one. Rukia.
Okay, thank you very much. Briefly, the sovereignty one is very tricky. It's not, I don't know if I can answer it, maybe. The thing is, we are talking about political sovereignty here. When we talk about countries being independent, you know, having their own political views. So, Guillaume, I don't know if you want me to connect the sovereignty, for example, to climate. I don't know, really. Maybe I'll leave this out, then I can think about it, and then we can discuss it. Maybe that would be a better approach. The one on development, development you cannot have peace, you can have security without development. So development is the key to peace and security, and they come together. There's no way you can start looking for peace if there's no development, and development is connected to the economy. So, as you say, the root cause is to find out what we can do to improve the economy, which will then bring peace and stability and then development.
Thank you so much. I think this echoes what Maya said in the first panel, that the best way to encourage good partnership, and in the case of the comments of Maya, also membership, is to make sure that that economy is improving, so that it has a benefit for the ordinary citizens. I think it's interesting to see the red threads that we see in the both panels. But now it's your choice, or maybe you want to eat them all, huh?
Known to have a vociferous appetite. Okay, I found it very interesting that you said some cultures choose to surrender. I'll tell you, I've never been to any culture that has not been subject to insecurity, instability, lack of basic human rights, who willingly choose to surrender. So that's just one anecdote. Talking about dictatorships, should we respect them? I totally agree with you. I'm a huge, on a personal level, I was not at all okay with Russia's aggression against Ukraine. It's absolutely abominable. I go back to the words of Prime Minister Edi Rama, who spoke about how Albania is expected to take sides, but the European Union does very little to combat the consequences, specifically talking about vaccine distribution. Guess who gave vaccines to Albania? It was Russia and Turkey. Way later did EU come and give vaccines. So I think the EU must question themselves on when they say we must protect sovereignty, what are the values you are willing to protect, and the people who are standing by you as allies, are you willing to treat them as equals, right? When it comes to the question of development, from my country, if you ask me, I think EU and America could very well take many lessons from my country on development. You talk about law and order. Equality was enshrined in our constitution from the very beginning. We didn't have to go through the suffragette movement. Our laws are exceptionally strong when it comes to protecting the rights of individuals. When it comes to innovation, India is the largest producer of the cheapest vaccine. The sort of contribution that they did to the global world is astronomical. And again, we didn't hoard vaccines. We didn't have to be told to hoard vaccines. We very generously gave it away. When it comes to war, that's happening right now. Go back to 2611, how India responded to Pakistan and the war that happened within our borders. We didn't say we're going to launch nuclear attack. We didn't go arbitrarily kill thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Pakistan, as many countries in America, the American foreign policy, if you may, we didn't adopt those sort of foreign policies. We did surgical strikes. We accounted for making sure the war criminals were provided justice. Sorry, we had justice, but not at the expense of killing the lives of innocent civilians. When it comes to empowerment, I go back to the exceptional work that people are doing on ground, the communities. We had the largest street protest to fight against the violence that happened when a girl was sexually abused in the bus, which led to reform in laws and policies to broaden the scope of what sexual abuse and violence looks like, right? When it comes to empowerment, I go back to that we've had prime ministers, we've had our foreign minister and our defense minister who's a woman. So again, we are already doing a lot of work that's led by women. Just to sum this all up, exceptional work is happening. What we ask with the EU is don't look at us like you need to come save us. Just recognize our agency, recognize our sovereignty, but also at the same time recognize that we are humans at the end of the day. We are 1.4 billion people, but let me tell you, each one of those 1.4 billion people, I think our brains cannot compute a number beyond a certain amount, right? It's just, everyone is just a sea of people. Recognize that these sea of people have human rights, have the same human rights that you would expect people that look like you with blonde hair and blue eyes to have. I use the words of someone who said Ukrainian refugees are okay because they look like us. Perhaps look at us like the way you would look at people with blonde hair and blue eyes, and provide us with the same decorum, courtesy, access to human rights that you would provide to yourself and your brethren. That's it.
That's it. Thank you. Big hand for these two ladies. We hand over to Erika.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for underlining how emotional this debate is, how many different perspectives, and I think also the thing that came out and that I hope that we'll be talking about also later is really understanding what should be the aim for Europe, because there is obviously the relationship towards citizens or the perception of citizens across the world, or is it toward nation states? Are we having competing narratives that we're trying to fit in our head at the same time? On the one hand, we want to be top of all the league tables in comparative, we want to have best GDP growth and all of these things, but at the same time, we also want to be supporting development. And how do we do that in an appropriate way? And I think that all of these questions came out, and we look forward to an interesting continuation of the debate later on. But now we will hear a wake-up call from industry. What is this perspective on industry on these issues? And we are very happy to have with us Jean-François Van BOXMEER, who's chairman of the European Roundtable for Industry, as well as chairman of Vodafone, to give us an overview of his perspective on these issues. Welcome very much to the floor.
I don't know what for wake-up call I can give to you after having had through two panels these wake-up calls that we just heard. But just on my modest perspective, to give you the perspective of business on the situation we are here in Europe. And I speak in the name of the ERT, which I'm chairing. The ERT stands for European Roundtable for Industry. It was founded 40 years ago by 17 business people around Commissioner back then, Etienne d'Avignon, who is also, I understood, one of your founding members of the Conclave. He's kind of a spiritual godfather also of many people, but also of the ERT. And they were tasked 40 years ago about thinking what a single European market could look like. And they have worked for that for around 10 years, because if ERT exists for 40 years, the single market celebrates its 30 years of existence. Yet today the ERT is a club of 60 members, chairs and CEOs of all industrial sectors across Europe. Only industry, no banking, no finance, no retail, industry. In all the sectors and all the countries, and not only of the European Union, but also including Switzerland and Norway, and still the United Kingdom, and also Turkey. Turkey, who was a long-standing candidate for European Union membership, but many people forget it, is a member of the custom union for a very long time. And so they are part of our family. What we do is a little bit think tank and a lot of lobbying towards our political forces and the Commission to create the right conditions for having a competitive industry in Europe. Now, the wake-up call is to say, well, things are really not good. And in the first panel, Ambassador Gardner made already a very big allusion to that, citing a few statistics. Back in the year 2000, China was just over 5% of the total industrial output of the planet. And Europe and the United States were around 21% of the total in the world. Now, it is expected that China would rise, and now well above 25% of the total of the world's industrial output. And it was expected that the US and Europe in relative term would fall. But what was not expected is that Europe would even fall below the United States of America. And from that 21%, slightly above the US in 2000, in 2020, 16.5% for the US, 14.5% for Europe. That is the difference. Should we accept that? The real wake-up call is there. Europe prides itself to create free societies with a lot of wealth, and also a welfare society that needs to be financed. And if you don't have a strong economic basis to do that, it's going to be put in jeopardy in the future. Now, Ambassador Gardner was pointing out the differential of GDP per capita. You have a lot of studies pointing out to the gap. The latest study I read was one, I don't know who published it, you will excuse that, and forgive my forgetting that, but if we would consider the richest of the European nations, and you rank them alongside the 50 states of the United States, then our first one comes at position 26. That's how bad the situation is. You have to realize that. So for us, if we look back over these 20 years, even in Europe, the globalization has been fantastic. We have opened up to the world, and we became all more prosperous together. So we should not have any regret that today China is much more potent than it used to be a quarter of a century ago. Neither should we regret that Brazil is a more potent country economically, or India for that matter, and many other countries in Asia, and that we have also to wish that the African continent rises. The real issue of Europe, it is losing its edge. It's becoming sloppy. And I think that if we want to continue to be a prosperous continent, we should address that. And I hear the European Commission President saying, I want to be a geopolitical commission. Now, the difference between geopolitical and economic is when you talk geopolitical, we enter into a world that is having more confrontational issues than collaboration opportunities. That is what it is. In business, confrontation is called competition. It can lead to destruction, but to cite the economist Schumpeter, it's creative destruction. When you talk about geopolitics, it has been rarely creative when it comes up to destruction. So that's a little bit of a philosophical call to say, if Europe wants to continue to be a power in the world, and again, our US ambassador was pointing out to the fact that yes, Europe has still a lot of strength to work on. It has to really look after its own competitiveness, because if it doesn't look after it, it's going to be weakening and weakening and weakening. It's the differential of growth rate that you have between the US and Europe that is frightening, and that will lead us to only decline if we don't wake up. That is the wake-up call. The reason now, looking to the future, I don't want to be a Cassandra. That is not the role of the ERT. It's to hand out solutions and paths to build and restore that competitiveness in the world. Now, I had only 10 minutes, so I would need another hour to explain you all, but I would certainly encourage you to go to our website and take the little report that we have been issuing a few weeks ago, and that also gives and hands out a few paths for a restoration of European competitiveness. But let's just, in a few minutes, take a few and single a few out of them. The first thing, and I come back to the founders of Europe and my predecessors at ERT, we have a richness which is the single market. The single market has brought enormous prosperity to Europe and to our industry and to our citizens. But for now a decade, it has been a little bit, like lingering. There are still a lot of non-tariff barriers in Europe, which makes it is not a single market. Think about the energy. There is no single market for energy in Europe. There is no single market for capital. So the banking union, all these things which are called for. So there is still a lot of work to do. It's politically not rewarding because it's nitty-gritty of regulation that needs to be fine-tuned, i.e. having more Europe, but a better Europe. That takes time. Nobody can claim a lot of announcement success on the short term in the political field, but this could deliver a growth path for the development of Europe going forward. We should always, also in Europe, being open to revisit our competition rules. Our competition doctrine has worked very well. There are two reasons why Europe is so competitive and productive in many, many industries, because the energy prices were high and our competitiveness compound of doctrine was very demanding on competition. But there are a number of industries, certainly in energy, also in the digital world, where if you don't have scale, you will not be able to prosper. And this is where Europe is still a collection of 27 markets and not a single market like the US is. So we need to revisit that, because otherwise we will forever continue to run behind in terms of innovation rate as well as in investments rate in our European industry. The energy transition is one of the most formidable and important tasks we have ahead of us, and that can differentiate Europe. There are a lot of industrial sectors which are at the forefront of the energy transition. There again, the message is to Europe is, you can regulate to a certain outcome. Europe is very, very strong in regulating to an outcome, which I call it the sticks. but you also have to prepare to use the carrots, what the IRA is doing in the United States for doing also that energy transition. We should be open for that. The same goes for digital infrastructure. We are running way behind the United States and China, for that matter, if we don't invest more in our digital infrastructure, just to cite a few things that we really need to do. We talk a lot about enlargement in Europe. Fine. The story of the enlargement towards Eastern Europe, which is the most recent enlargement, I was living in Poland in the mid-1990s. What a fantastic adventure. And it has brought a lot of prosperity to companies, but also to citizens. The same will go for the next enlargement wave, if you will. Economically, it's a good deal. The problem is you can't run the European Union like you run it today with 9 more members. So there also, that work should be done proactively, not only to accommodate 9 members, but also to address the shortcomings of governance that the European Union and Commission has already today. That is one of our recommendations. We talked a lot about trade and market access and strategic autonomy. And I couldn't agree more. Strategic autonomy does not exist. It does not exist for Europe, but it exists for nobody. There are a few people who are strategically autonomous, like Russia, in terms of natural resources. But is it on other fields? I think it's, in business, the name of the game is interdependency. And we have to learn to be a little bit more granular in analyzing our interdependencies than we were in the past, where everybody specialized in one thing, and so we were hyper-dependent on someone. And when that someone starts to use it for geopolitical uses, business is toast. So business has also to learn to diversify its sources, but it's a very important, and Europe must continue to be an open continent. We have no, I know I will stop in 2 minutes. I know, I know that you will not gain Europe by being more protectionist. We are tendentially more open than the US, and we should remain like that. But we should also be prepared to deepen our ties, starting with the US. We should not shun for that. There is a gigantic opportunity in enriching our ties in the US. And finally, R&D and skills are a very important pathway to invest in, but I will stop there. And these are only a few of these policy measures that we have to deepen for making the European continent a more competitive continent, because there is no prosperity without a strong economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us these insights and also looking at some very concrete perspective. We now come to our last panel. There's been a lot of food for thought, a lot of different things brought up, and the view was to bring up a couple of special guests, a special panelists, to discuss from the European perspective on what we have heard and where we can go from here. If it's okay, seeing that we're running a little bit late, can we give another 10 minutes to this panel? Guillaume, do we have time for that?
I think we can. We have dinner at 7.
Okay, well then I arbitrarily give you an additional 10 minutes. And I'll let you decide when the conversation is ready. I know we will be able to continue this for 2 hours, but there will be time during the dinner afterwards. But Guillaume, I give you the floor to present the panelists.
Yes, so I'm going to go on with the first name, because we have decided to use only first name. So I start with Nadia. Nadia, you can sit in the middle. Jan Krzysztof. Oliver. And Stepan. And Stepan. Where are you, Stefan? Ah, he is coming. Yeah, you can sit. And I suggest, as my friend, and I suggest, as my friend Philippe did, that each of you introduce yourself very quickly. Nadia.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to meet you. I'm Nadia CRISAN. I'm originally from Romania, living currently in the US at Princeton and working for Princeton University.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Oliver RÖPKE. I'm the president of the European Economic and Social Committee. I was elected in April, a bit more than 6 months ago, and I come from the trade union movement and was many years advisory member of the executive board of the Austrian Trade Union Confederation.
Hello. A very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jan Krzysztof BIELECKI. I'm a former retired truck driver and also somebody who works in business today. And what more? I'm based in Poland. Yes, I come from Poland and I'm based in Poland. Yes.
And you told me somehow that you are the political father of Donald Tusk. Yeah. Could we say that? Stefan?
Pleasure to be here. I'm dressed like IT guy, so we don't wear suits and ties, but this is also a signal of declining Europe because Lufthansa lost my luggage. I'm owner of the M+ group, and I'm also a scientist and researcher.
So welcome to everybody, and we are very happy to have you as participants. I just hope that you will be a bit shorter than our previous participants who have a lot to say tomorrow morning during the conclave. Maybe we are going to start with you, Nadia. So you listen, because that was the game. What are the takeaways of the discussion you heard about how we are perceived and what kind of expectation there is vis-à-vis Europe nowadays?
Can I borrow the mic? Good, thank you. To me, the fundamentals for the future of the European Union really lay with our values. I think no matter where you go, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, the rest of the world, any survey will tell you that most folks there would want to live in Europe or the United States. So I think our values continue to be the main base of attraction. I think it's really where we can provide the most support to countries who need it. I hear the concerns of our brothers and sisters in the continent, where unfortunately there are serious concerns over sovereignty, over food security, over national securities. And I can only say that particularly the question of migration, when you hear migrants saying it's Europe or we die, that's a very serious question for those folks who risk their life only to have Europeans who send them back, Europeans who would get out of the UNHCR simply to send some Rwandans back, or other governments in member states who would completely violate human rights, which to me is a very significant concern.
But just to go on, because you speak about values,
yes.
But we were challenged because what I listen, maybe I'm wrong because you are here and you can contradict myself, is there are some contradiction about what we say and the way we practice our value. And we are not always very consistent.
Well, you talk about politicians, so they have to have a platform of dialogue. I think you have public conversations and you have private conversations, and most of the ambassadors here would know what I'm talking about. It is difficult to see that folks who criticize us indicate clearly that we should not support, whether it's Erdogan and authoritarians or Orban, and this is one of the biggest problems that I think the EU faces. You get in, and there are no consequences for not complying with the values and the rest of the acquis if you change your attitude and your pseudo-democracy once you join in. So I think there are many factors to go into details, but I'm sure others have more things to say.
Jan Krzysztof, I saw you during the first debate. You were reacting very actively to what the Brazilian and the American ambassador were saying. Am I wrong?
Yes, and that's why I prefer to introduce myself as the truck driver, because the language of the truck drivers is more straightforward, and I hope that also I will try and be able to name a few takeaways from this fascinating conference. First of all, let me say, in my view, Europe is, at this moment, at this stage, is like a very, very attractive playground. Definitely not a playground, which is also turning into the nursery house because the population is aging and demography is acting against us. Even in my country, when we started the transition, the median for Poles was 34, now it's 44, shortly could be 49, so half of the population will be above 50. From the youngest population, I think we are going to be the oldest, even worse situation than in Greece. So, and as it was said, it's still attractive playground, not a player. No, nobody wants us to be a player. If you remember, President Xi said recently in California to Joe Biden, yes, there is a lot of place on the earth for both of us, both of us. Didn't mention India, neither Russia, but no, we could let the country. Oh, the Americans are giving us the best solution to join them and in the fight against China. So everybody wants to act on the playground and give us good examples. At the same time, the second word which is important is the grievance. I think grievance is coming from everywhere, and everybody is complaining about the bad Europeans who were colonialists and did this bad, and they are not open to migration and so. And when even the previous moderator mentioned about the management of migration, I think which is a minimum which Europe is obliged to do if it wants to really to respect the vote, the popular vote of the people. Yesterday in UK, today in the Netherlands, tomorrow maybe in so many other countries, including my country. So the grievance is addressing also the claim that Europe should be better, should treat us in a more fair way, and also provide additional assistance. At the same time, to make really a big story short, I think that for Europe there is one specific test. And this is not the American test, it's not the Chinese test, not the Indian test, not even the migration test. This is the test how Europe will behave in the course of the developing war in Ukraine. And if Europe is not able to tackle it, if Europe will accept the breach of any basic international rules and accept that Russia could, for the time being, only absorb 25% of the country. But tomorrow, when they will get a little bit stronger, they will come for more. This is the end of the Europe based on the values we like to speak so much and so often and with such a proud. Because it's to some extent a challenge like it was in 1948 when the Soviets occupied Germany and they decided to block Berlin or West Berlin, and it was an open challenge like a gauntlet thrown into the ring, whether you give up or you fight. And the West decided to fight, and after that built a very successful country, which is today well known as West Germany. So So this is the real challenge for Europe, and I cannot imagine a situation when it is not sorted out, it is put on a fake standstill, and then the Europe will be progressive. When Russians proved how they managed to weaponize oil, gas, international trade, and whatever. At the same time, Europe is therefore also an attractive playground because nobody wants to leave Europe, but also the member states are not realizing today Europe as the common house. And you hear more and more, even from the Netherlands today, you heard that they could leave the country from the wilders, or what is the proper pronunciation? The Hungarians, they speak about the illiberal democracy, which is like, again, the provocation towards basic European values. So we have also the problem inside, but we have to really recognize what was said about the business, about the single market, but we have to recognize the present challenge. And the present challenge is to defend the fundamental rights, and also our fellows from whatever, India or Brazil or Africa, they have to understand that our meaning of human rights and territorial integrity is very, very basic and very well, simple, very simple. And I stop now because I've finished.
Somehow what you are saying also is we need to be clearer with regard to our narrative, to explain ourselves much better, because what you say we are not explaining, and we have not a discussion with our partner on this. So it's also a part of our responsibility on this side. You are from the business, so I don't want you to react to the wake-up call of Jean-François, but just to what you listened earlier from the two panels regarding how powers such as the US and Brazil consider us, but also India and Nigeria, sorry, Kenya, but Africa somehow, because you speak for Africa, you are the voice of Africa here.
Very briefly, I always think we should look for a best possible answer. And the best possible answer is scientific one. And whatever we discuss, we should look into best evidence. And I think what evidence on the theoretical level can tell us very briefly is that we as a human, as a mankind and human race, we made a difference because we have one capacity no any other has. And this is capacity to collaborate. And if you look into the evolution, you will find the moment from Jane Goodall on research that we made a difference because we can work together. Chimpanzees can't. And the biggest challenge of our moment as we speak as a humanity first is that we develop technologies, including destructive capacities of technologies, much faster than our ability to collaborate. And then there are many researchers from, for example, Joshua Green at Harvard and others, showing that we are capable to work against our own interest if we work in favor of the tribe. And that's why we have the tribal conflicts. And then we can call these tribal conflicts more in the more complex terms. And I think that's the key problem of the future. The next level is we are deterritoriating everywhere. And we can proudly speak Europe, US, China, hitting our chests, but there are objective measures how we measure progress, again, scientifically. There are two guys from MIT, Acemoglu and Robinson. They wrote a fantastic book, Why Nations Fail, and it's a very simple message. They took 300 years of history and showed that the progress is connected to independent and inclusive institutions. More independent and more inclusive institutions are the progress is better. It's scientific, serious research. What we see around the world is less independent and less inclusive institutions, everywhere. And then when we move to, I would say, next, more practical level, looking into the Europe and others, I would say my country is the one that is more democratic, most human, and most inclusive. And for the moment, that's why I like Europe. Not because it's perfect, but it's best within what we can choose, with a lot of problems. If anyone deserves a Nobel Prize for peace, that was Europe. There were some ridiculous awards, and still coming. But I think if we want to express our loyalty to something, this is because of the basic principles we believe in. And that's inclusiveness, democracy, respect for rights, our basic feeling for what is right and what is ethical. Even a 4-year-old child has a feeling of what is right. And when you look around the world, what is happening, people have an elementary feeling of what is right and what is not right. And now, going down, because we speak Outlook 2040, there is a fantastic book of Philip Tetlock, Forecasting and Super Forecasting. So let me forecast a bit. I think it will be bumpy road. And it will be very challenging and dangerous and difficult. Even next year, we may have a US that is completely different to existing one. Even looking from the point of view of independent and inclusive institutions we talk about. And we should use each same criteria looking into anyone. So, as an entrepreneur also, now my other hat, we are doing, I think, what Europe should do anywhere. We are a European company, actually basically a German one if you look employees and revenues, but we also invest a lot in countries that are kind of near-shoring to Europe. We invest a lot in Turkey. We invest in Georgia, not lost, we grow 55% this year. And I think what we see through this is that all the principles you advocate in general, if you apply in business, it works. It's not just empty words.
So just what I should say is in the development of your business, and you have a very fast growing business, you are putting values into reality. I just explained, and so equality between men and women, inclusiveness, responsibility, payback, because you share your shares. And this is very, very efficient because you are, I think, the company who has the fastest growth in Europe, maybe.
So yeah, we grew from 300 employees to 40,000 in 4 years. And we have in Turkey, for example, 7,000 employees. And the lady who is the chairman of the board. And we already have 43% women in a managing position. And we issued ESG bond, we are obliged to have 51. But these are like just principles, but it's good for the business.
No, but so the link between value and implementing the value and the power of the implementation. Oliver, because you are the head of the civil society in Europe.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I was a bit late. I couldn't see.
That's why you have the floor the last.
Exactly. No, I was late because I couldn't see the first panel. I couldn't follow the first panel. I was at an interesting event in Bratislava, and I would like to play the Advocatus Diaboli, because we are speaking about fundamental rights, about our European values, democratic values, and I fully share them. But do we still share the same concept of democracy? I think the answer is clear. We've heard Hungary, we have different concepts. It's also very interesting to see now in Bratislava, to see this new government, which concept of democracy they are following, a government which considers themselves as a social democratic government. So I think we have really to ask ourselves, have we still enough common ground? And if not, we have to define this common ground, because I think we need it. We need it when we want to be successful as a global actor, as European Union. You said I'm the president of the organized civil society. Yes, we are 329 members. So I don't claim that we represent everybody, but it's true, we represent employers, trade unions, NGOs from all member states. But also here, I think we have to be more inclusive, and we have to insist on fundamental rights. So when I took office, I said clearly my priority is stand up for democracy and speak up for Europe. This is something we cannot compromise. We cannot compromise. And when we see the elections in the Netherlands just 2 days ago, and we have other examples, then we can see that we live somehow in two bubbles at the moment in Europe. At the same time, 2 days ago, the European Parliament adopted a very, very positive and I would say inspiring resolution for a stronger Europe, asking for a treaty convention with a lot of ideas how to make this Europe really functioning, also when enlargement is on the table. And I think this is the point we have to discuss now. Where can we find some common ground on democracy, on fundamental rights, also on social Europe? We have heard a lot of things about competitiveness. I share it, but social Europe must be at the same footing. So this was also a demand of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And here, I would insist that vibrant civil society must be a key component, not only complementary, it is really a key component of democracy, of representative and participative democracy. And maybe one last idea to enlargement, because I share very much the view that enlargement, we have the geopolitical moment now for enlargement, and we cannot allow to leave these countries alone in the waiting room. I don't speak only about Ukraine and Moldova, but especially the Western Balkan countries. We can see that the trust in Europe is decreasing if we don't make concrete steps to involve them in our work, to show them that there is at least a gradual progress and gradual involvement. So we took the decision as first EU institution from 1st of January 2024, we will involve them in our work. So all candidate countries will send their representatives from trade unions, from employers, from civil society organizations already working with us. And I think this is not only a one-way street. We can also learn from them. We can fostering and empowering civil society and social partner structures in those countries, because I think in recent enlargement rounds we did it too late. So I think we have to do it right now, even if enlargement will take place only in some or even many years in the case of some other countries.
May I throw the ball here? Outlook 2040.
Yeah.
Europe will have 700 million citizens. It will involve Ukraine 44 million, UK 67, and Turkey 87. And it's the only big superpower that has that type of magnetism, but also capacity to enlarge. Can you imagine US changing the constitution to take another country or any other? And my experience is I have companies in all these countries. And we should dare and be courageous, especially with Turkey. Ukraine, I don't want even to discuss. That we should go there and not look what's happening today or in a year, but strategically. This is such a talent-rich, strong potential, even for democracy. There are people in Turkey, many people that are more prepared to invest everything in their life in democracy than anywhere in Europe. And if you look into the results of elections, if you look 100 years of experience in industrialization, economy, and so on, this is the minimum of courage Europe should take. And being a continent with 700 million citizens with such a potential, I'm continuing on what we are late, you know. And this would also address problems of migrations and many others. And there are many countries in Europe that are more problematic now or at the verge of what we speak now there. And in UK, there is now almost 70% people that think we should go back to Europe because we are good.
So that was the next question I have for each of you. So you started first.
Sorry.
But no problem. I mean, you make the job. Nadia, what is your vision, your positive vision for Europe in 2040?
Well, I think on the larger question, there is no doubt that Ukraine and every country that qualifies should be part of the EU. Some of the bureaucrats in Brussels say, buy Ukraine, get six free. I think this is the slogan that I hear the most often, which is really more than symbolic, to be honest. The question of transatlantic relations remains very important. I live in the US, but I'm Romanian. I think the scariness around who will win the elections and who will be in the White House next year is a significant concern here and way less of a concern back home.
But project yourself in 2040.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to do. So I think if the focus is rather on what's going to happen next year and for 4 more years, this is, to me, not about 4 more years. It's really about 14 years, 16 years from now. And I only see a society of values, a society who is acting upon those values, and one where commerce will flourish, where ideas will flourish, and where a place like Silicon Valley will not be seen as a competitor in Europe, but rather as a partner. Europeans have tried, and unfortunately we failed. We cannot copy Silicon Valley. We should be complementary to Silicon Valley. So I think that's the essence of complementarity, of working together, and really standing by our values. To me, that's the fundamental.
Oliver?
Well, I can continue where I stopped before. I think the question of enlargement is there. When we think about 2040, then it's clear for me it must be a Europe that is inclusive. And enlargement means merit-based. I agree. It can't be not only a political decision, it must be merit-based. And we have to defend our values. We cannot compromise on this. This is clear. But once again, I had the honor of visiting Ukraine just 3 weeks ago, and I have to say I was really impressed by the resilience of social partners and civil society. More resilient, more vibrant than in some EU member states, I have to say. So I think there is a lot of potential that we can use. I know there are a lot of difficulties ahead of us, and I'm not naive, but we have to make the steps. We have to make the next steps, and I think an enlarged union, which is a geopolitical factor, at the same time competitive and convening space also for social, for civil society, strong social partnership. This is actually my vision for 2040. And when I say convening space, then I have to insist, since I'm representing the ESC, I think there was for me one key moment some month ago in New York at the United Nations when we presented our first voluntary review of the SDG achievements. And we contributed to this as ESC, and EU was the only region where we had a joint delegation, where we jointly, where Team Europe, so politicians, the Commission, Committee of Regions, social partners, and the ESC together presented this. And I could see that many other NGOs from other regions, they said, wow, this is really, and we criticized that we were not fully involved, not enough. And I would say it's true, we can always improve this. But I think this is something we can be proud of, and this is our strength. And I would really insist on this when we have 2040, an enlarged union. This should be in the center of our fundamental rights.
Jan Krzysztof?
Yes, I think we should stop dreaming about enlargement or any social or even more economic or competitive progress unless we turn Europe into kind of a economic security state, because in these days, security is not only about the warfare or about terrorism, but security is about problems which we observe in Europe very clearly, like food security, like energy shortages and weaponization of oil and gas. It's climate change, and the security strategy for Europe should be the cornerstone of the new architecture, and we should, as soon as possible, forget about this beautiful French strategic autonomy or something like that, but to spend some money on the security. And if the Americans could spend $2 trillion on Afghanistan and $2 trillion also on Iraq, why Europe cannot spend 50 billion on Ukraine is a question which I cannot answer by myself. So either we are serious or not. Either we are very good in consuming the peace dividend, which Western Europe really enjoyed, and don't forget that not that many years ago, in the 80s, the UK spent 5% of GDP on defense. The Netherlands, 3%, I think. Even Germany spent more than 2%, 3% almost. French, even more than that. And then when the 1989 happened, everybody was so happy that they cut the spendings and consumed the peace dividend, distributed more social welfare to the citizens, and today for Germany to have a operational one squadron of helicopters is a challenge too big to deliver, and to reach 2% in the next 5 years will be a big problem. So this is not possible, I think.
No, Stéphane.
But don't finish with defense talking about 2040. Offense would say in basketball in US, if you don't have a dream, a big story about the future will not happen. Europe should have a dream and a story about 2040, and then do everything within the dream.
So let me conclude with my dream, because you introduced me the dream. For me, just remind something. 20 years ago, we were a technological leader. So I would not say we can't copy the Silicon Valley, because the Silicon Valley is the result also of a defense effort. We need to dare to change our paradigm, because the world has changed. The European integration project was designed post-war in a specific context, and the context has radically changed. So we need to adapt radically our approach, and we need to stop thinking as if we were 70 years ago. So please open your mind. Forget the past, because the power of Europe was innovation. Innovation. And in fact, if Portugal would have been, that's a discussion we had with the president yesterday, innovative enough, Portugal would not be here. It would be in Brazil, because Rio had been the capital of Portugal. Just for fun, but I mean, it's important not to think narrow-minded. Let's forget the past, and let's try to think about the future. And I know what I want for Europe. And I know the condition for Europe to be effective. If we want our value not to be shared, but to be understood, we need to be a power. And we are not a power. We are a power in certain dimension. But being a power in certain dimension not means to be a power. I listened what I was said. And, well, we are not a power. We are a superpower sometimes, which is completely different. So where can we be a power? We can be a transnational, multilingual, democratic power, leveraging the potential of technology. we can completely reinvent our social health system thanks to the power of science and technology by investing sufficiently. We can invent the value of the future by leveraging technology also, but also by leveraging the maturity of our civil society. And whatever we may say, populism is everywhere, but if there were resilience with regard to science, with regard to democracy, it is in Europe, nowhere else. So let's stop disparaging ourselves. Let's try to be a bit proud of what we have done and forget the condition that we have now, and let's think where we want to be tomorrow. And that is the real question, because we spoke about the US. I listened to the ambassador. He said that if Trump is re-elected, he wants to destroy Europe. How are we going to prepare ourselves? But re-election, it is in 1 year. And we need to be prepared in 1 year if we want to be able to discuss. That's a question for the conclave. So what I understand is we have a diversity of talent, a diversity of conviction. That is the objective of the conclave. And we are going to have a very good, very warm conclave. We just need to be, to respect some rules in terms of time tomorrow and to respect each other in order to be very positive and to produce something in order to influence the game. And we are in a period, and I have understood that also listening to you, which is critical because the game is really open. At European level, leaders don't know where to go, and at global level, everybody tries to find the next global order, but nobody knows what it is. So the game is open, and it's a good thing. Thank you very much, and let's go to the dinner.
A big thank you to the moderators who have been preparing all of this, and to all of you for joining us here and for spending a weekend with us to reimagine Europe.